Hi again then guys, and welcome to another Rivals matchup on Gran Turismo Sport, and this time we are revisiting a Rivals match which we've kind of had before. This is the next stage in the series, kind of like how we've moved on through the different variations of Evo versus Impreza. This is another Rivals match which we are continuing from Gran Turismo 6, and it's one of the Rivals matches which can justifiably be had on pretty much every Gran Turismo game. Corvette versus Viper. On Gran Turismo 6, of course, we pitted the C5R Corvette up against the red and white Viper GTSR Team Orica, and now we're going to the next stage. Not the C6 versus the Viper, but instead the C7 race car against the Viper GT3R. They are both, of course, in the same class, they have the same price, they are direct rivals to each other in a general sense, and in a literal class sense. So as we always do, we're going to first give each car a quick rundown, a breakdown of some of the highlights, good points, maybe bad points, kind of like a mini review, and then we'll pit their on-paper numbers and their lap times to some degree in a head-on match to see, for the fun of it, of course, and you always have to take these matches with a pinch of salt because, of course, they're fully tuned, which a lot of people don't do. Bigger engines are given more points, which doesn't always apply, of course. It's just for the fun of it. So, let's get straight into it. First up then we have the Viper GT3R, and this is of course a returning vehicle from a few episodes ago in Rivals where we did a V10 engine race car match between this, the Audi R8 and the Lamborghini Huracan. The car fared pretty well, a considerably different type of V10 to both of the others, and here it's even better matched really, even though they had V10s. The Corvette is really its main rival, it always has been, of course you want to pit it up against that. Now the Viper is a car which I would describe overall as being kind of like a really big, heavy dog, like a Tibetan Mastiff for instance, which is one of my personal favourite dogs. It's this huge, hulking mass of a dog which has such power they use to guard Tibetan mountain camps from mountain lions. Yeah, a dog that guards against lions, they're that intense, but when you look at the thing, it's this big fluffy dog which doesn't really make its presence known unless necessary. It feels like this lumbering, happy-go-lucky kind of thing which is pretty chill most of the time. That's what the Viper is like. It's this big, seemingly heavy, but it's actually not, it just looks heavy. This big, powerful, torquey V10, literally a truck engine reworked by Lamborghini. You know what it's like. The Viper hasn't changed that much, it's just become more refined. And I would say that on Gran Turismo Sport in particular, this Viper, arguably, at least for me, feels better than it ever has before. In particular with regard to the handling. It's so smooth, it's easy to work with, even with almost 700 horsepower. And even though, of course, you can get the tail out, if you set it up correctly, it's a dream to work with. It takes everything in its stride. It never really feels like you have to push the car that hard. But the slight downside to that is that it doesn't necessarily feel, to me at least, as quick as it actually is. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but I'm sure you guys also recognise from personal experience there are just certain cars that, when you drive them, they feel as fast as they are. They are this visceral experience. They're big, they're loud, they're fast. Everything feels heightened and sharp. Something like a Formula car or an LMP, for instance, will often have that kind of tendency. Then, though, you have something which feels a little bit more low. It's got a lower sound, lower torque, that more lumbering kind of style, which is still a fast car, something maybe like a touring car, for instance, or a V8 supercar, or even a NASCAR. They're not quite as visceral as something like a prototype or an open-wheel car, but they're still very fast. That's kind of like what the Viper feels like in comparison to a lot of the louder, lighter, or initially lighter Italian rivals, Euro rivals in general, and even some other American ones. It's a great all-round car to go with, and so that begs the question, of course, with all of its sheer power and torque and massive engine, how does it compare to the Corvette, which, of course, has been around for a lot longer? Well, the Corvette always has the advantage, regardless of what generation you're talking about, of having such a long development period through experience that the Viper just didn't have. The Viper was a late 80s concept which came to fruition in the 90s and was developed since then, so it's only a few decades old, really, a couple. The Corvette is much older. From the 50s, the Corvette has been around, and unlike the Viper, it had a lot more involvement in motorsport even from a much, much earlier stage. The Viper initially was very much so a sports car equivalent of a hot rod, whereas the Corvette is more of a pure sports car with kind of a muscle inclination in its mid-life, say C2, C3, but in this form, I initially didn't like this Corvette. In real life, I like the C7. I like the C7 race car on various other games like Forza, but when I first drove this car, it was way back in 2016, when I first played Gran Turismo Sport. Of course, I had no experience with the game. I went into it thinking I knew what I was doing, turned traction control off, turned off ABS, all of that kind of stuff. I know what I'm doing with Gran Turismo 6. Then I got in the car, and of course, it's a new car on a new game, totally different physics, and the car was sliding all over the place. So of course that kind of put me off a little bit. I thought, what are they doing? What are they doing with the physics of this game? It feels more like something which is optimised for a wheel, like Assetto Corsa or Project Cars. Not that that's bad for someone who likes that, but that's not what I'm into. Then when you actually get into the game, of course, and now especially with the beta, the demo, and now update after update refining the physics and the handling, the Corvette really has gone from strength to strength, to the point where even since doing the review, it feels better now than it even did then. The handling on this thing is fantastic, and it's actually the exact opposite to what I would class the Viper as. As I said with the Viper, it's got this real lazy, effortless feel to it, whereas with the Corvette, it feels fast. It is louder, sharper, lighter on its feet, and funnily enough, you'd be surprised how many of the specs, even specs which you might not expect the Corvette to be better at than the Viper, it actually is. So with that in mind, how do they actually compare? Because as you can see from the lap time in the video, the Corvette was quicker. So let's find out. First of all then, as usual, we have a couple of ways in which the cars are, of course, going to be equal. So, as I always say, you could choose to either give neither of the cars a point, or, in the case of me, let's just give them both a point for the sake of it. At least it makes the end numbers look a little bit more impressive, especially for the losing car. So, the price is the same, and of course, the category is the same, so let's give them both a point there. Then, that's where it starts to change up, because although we're not told what engine size the Corvette supposedly has, it is pretty obvious that of course the Viper is bigger anyway. So, as I mentioned earlier, these are purely for fun, top trump style. Bigger engines are not always better, but for the sake of fun, we always give the bigger engine the point. So of course, whenever a Viper's in a match, it's pretty much guaranteed to get that point, even if it's up against a Veyron or a Speed 12. As far as power though, that's when it starts to swing the other way. As I alluded to just now with the Corvette, I did not expect the Corvette to have more power than the Viper, and yet it does. 3 horsepower more. That really did surprise me. But then it gets even more surprising because the torque on the Corvette is also higher, but by an even bigger margin, 687 pound-feet to the 653 of the Corvette. But then to cap it all off, in fact not to cap it off, but certainly getting there, it's also lighter, 1,092 kilos to the 1,096 of the Viper. That one's probably not too surprising. The Corvette certainly looks like a lighter vehicle, and of course with less weight and more power, it follows that of course the horsepower per tonne is going to be higher on the Corvette as well, by 5 horsepower per tonne, which is minimal, but it's still an advantage, and as we already said, the lap time does definitely go in favour of the Corvette with a 2:13.796 compared to a 2:13.992. So not a massive difference, and of course with different drivers, definitely on different tracks and with different tuning, you could go back and forth all day having different results. So of course that's just for me, and that's why we don't give it a point for that. It's just an interesting thing to note. However, on this occasion, this is one of the rarer times where the car with stronger specs is also the quicker, because that's the Corvette with the better lap time and 6 points to its name overall compared to the Viper's 3. So it's actually quite a landslide win overall on paper for the Corvette, despite the fact that the Viper has 1 unique point to its name, which is the larger engine. All of the other points are just shared with the Corvette, such as price or class, whereas the Corvette has 4 unique points, and they're all good. Power, torque, weight, and horsepower per tonne go to the Corvette by a big margin. So I did not expect it to be that kind of landslide victory for the Corvette, but on this occasion it definitely was. So both cars are definitely worth checking out, and ultimately, of course, you can win in either vehicle, that's the whole point. And whether you're a Corvette fan or a Viper fan, I would definitely say that they feel probably the best that they ever have in the franchise in this game, in particular with regard to handling. But that's it overall for this particular pick. Of course, I'll see you guys next time with another matchup, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.